and welcome to another webinar by Royal Cyber. Today, we brought another interesting topic for our audience, how to implement CICD on MuleSoft using Azure DevOps. Now, before we jump into the presentation, if anyone is unable to view my screen or hear me properly, kindly notify me on the chat window located at the right side of the pan. Now, let's have a quick glance at the agenda. We'll start off with Team Foundation Server overview. Then we will talk about CI/CD using Azure DevOps. We will build and deploy pipeline, setting up notification and approver, connected apps, Anypoint CLI, and ARM-REST API, followed by the demo. Now, before we start, I want to talk a little bit about Royal Cyber. Royal Cyber is a globally recognized award-winning technology partner that is helping organizations accelerate their digital transformation journey for over 2 decades. Royal Cyber has 1,200 plus employees globally, with 250 odd certified consultants, having more than 10 offices in 5 continents, and more than 600 happy customers. My name is Ali, and I am the Technical Account Manager. And with me here today are the two great and knowledgeable speakers, Surinder Palani, who is the Solution Architect at Royal Cyber, and Mr. Mir Mustafa Ali Pasha, who is the Practice Head for Middleware. Now, without the delay further, I will hand this over to Surinder for him to take you through the presentation and the demo. Over to you, Surinder. Thank you.
Thank you, Ali, for the warm introduction. Hello, everyone. We all know that CI/CD is the combined practices of continuous integration, continuous delivery, or continuous deployment. CI/CD bridges the gap between development and operation activities by enforcing automation in building, deployment, and testing of applications. Some additional benefits to go with it are: it helps the developer to stay focused on development. All the stakeholders have easy access to the latest, or for that matter, any version of the artifact. All changes are logged and can be backtracked at any point. Easy and effective rollback in case of deploy time failures. There are several ways by which you can maintain the version of an artifact in TFS. Here, we have jotted down what worked efficiently for one of our clients. Developers start their development on a working branch. Once they are unit tested and ready to be deployed to the dev environment, the merge to the parent branch happens. So it can be a merge or a creation of a new parent branch. This parent branch will be used to perform dev, QA, and UAT deployments. Once ready for a prod release, there would be a merge to the master branch finally. So our next question is, where will CI/CD find its place in this approach? Once the merge to the parent happens, the non-prod pipeline kicks in to perform the CI process. Once the jar is built using the Maven, CD to dev, QA, and UAT can take place. We can configure approval steps for QA and UAT deployments. Once the respective testing teams in each environment provides their sign-off, merge to the master is performed the prod pipeline. This step can also have its respective approvals. What we are seeing here is a representation of the continuous deployment. By separating the build process from the deployment, we are able to perform a single build and multiple deploys to the different environments, which minimizes the build effort for the same artifact. We can set up notifications to alert us for the build success, build failure, deployment success, and deployment failure. So we can provide the email addresses of the entire team or the respective API owners to configure the alerts. We can also establish approvers for each stage of deployment, be it both pre-deployment and post-deployment. For our demo, we are using connected apps to establish the connectivity between Azure DevOps and Anypoint platform. We are using it for retrieving an API artifact from Anypoint Exchange and to perform the deployment to both CloudHub and on-premise servers. There are two major prerequisites which we need to discuss. The first one is the settings.xml file. So this is used to provide the authentication credentials for the Azure Artifactory from where we can retrieve
Hello, hi everyone. This is Royal Cyber Moderator. We are experiencing some connectivity issue. We will get back to you in a minute. So please stay with us and we truly apologize for the inconveniences. Thank you.
rather download the dependency of the domain project for our on-premise deployment. This will be discussed in detail as part of the demo. The second dependency or a prerequisite would be the credentials file. This provides the list down of the credentials by which we establish the connectivity to Anypoint platform. In my case, this is going to be the connected apps. As an alternative, you can also provide the username and password combination here. We are all familiar about the Anypoint CLI, which is the command line utility provided by Mule for interacting with the runtime manager, Anypoint Exchange, the access management, design center, etc. Here, we are using Anypoint CLI to perform both CloudHub and on-premise deployments. The Anypoint Runtime Manager's REST services provides a list of APIs by which we can communicate to the on-premise servers on the Anypoint platform. Here, for our demo, we are using it to retrieve the bearer token for the authorization purposes and also to perform the fresh deployment to the on-premise servers by providing the runtime properties during deployment. As an additional point, the Anypoint Runtime Manager REST services are used only to interact with the on-premise servers. There are appropriate CloudHub APIs to interact with the CloudHub servers. As part of the demo, the solution which we are going to discuss has been successfully implemented in one of our projects where APIs are deployed to both CloudHub and on-premise environments. As part of the demo, I'll be covering CICD for both CloudHub and on-premise deployments. I'll be starting off with the CICD process for CloudHub. What we have here is a simple API to be deployed on CloudHub. Our main objective here is to minimize the pom.xml changes required specific to the CICD process. This can be a real deal breaker in ongoing projects as CICD would be introduced when the project is ongoing and it can cause overhead if a lot of API specific configurations are required in the pom.xml file. So in this pom.xml, it lists down the dependencies which are required by the API and the repositories from where it can download those dependencies. For the CICD process in particular, these two repositories would be required and it can be added to all the pom.xml files irrespective of where the API is getting deployed, be it on-prem or CloudHub. So in Azure DevOps, This is the repository structure for our projects that deleted APIs, CICD. So this is the CloudHub API, which we are interested in deploying. So going to pipelines. Firstly, let me show the library where the settings.xml file and the credentials files are listed. So we can also go ahead and create variable groups here, listing down the keys for the specific environments. So under secure files, we have the settings.xml file here and credentials file. Only the person who has uploaded the file has the rights to view this. So this accounts for the security in the Azure DevOps. Okay. Let's move on to creating a CI pipeline. Yeah. Our source here is TFS. We need to map the project path. Continue. Azure DevOps provides a list of templates which we can automatically make use of. But as part of our demo, I'll be starting off with an empty job. So under the CI pipeline, we need to first specify the agent specification. So ours would be Ubuntu. We need to mention the name of the pipeline. So it is going to be demo. Before we forget, let's trigger the continuous integration and again specify which TFS path should trigger the build. So this is the API we are interested in. So going back to task. Our first task would be to download the secure file. In our case, the settings.xml file. So we'll be mentioning it here. And we need to provide an output name by which we can reference it. So this is going to be my name. The next task would be adding a bash script. It's going to be an inline script, a one-liner command, a maven command to specify the clean and packaging by listing down our security file, which is our settings.xml. And the final task would be to publish this artifact. So we'll be publishing the pipeline artifact. We need to mention a name. So let's give it the same name as the pipeline. Let's save it. Okay, so this concludes the CA part of the pipeline. Now we are going to releases to create the CD part. New release pipeline. Empty job again. So let's give it the same name as the CA. So we need to specify here the artifact. So it is going to be CloudHub demo, and we are interested in picking the latest one. So here, this is the trigger button to enable continuous deployment. So I'll be enabling it. And the next step would be to specify the deployment for dev environment. So let's keep the stage as dev. Again, the agent specification should be Ubuntu. So here again, the first step would be to download the secure file. This time it is going to be the credentials file, which would contain the connected app details for an outsider to connect to the Anypoint platform. And the next step would be to configure the bash for the deployment. So it's going to be in line again. And before we go about pasting it here, I would like to show the cd command here. So it is a simple bash script. So firstly, we are printing some comment lines here. And the next step would be to go about and install npm. And once npm is installed, we are going to install Anypoint CLI. So once Anypoint CLI is installed, we need to create the appropriate home directories and move the credentials file inside the home directory. And we are exporting a profile to make use of the connected app profile. So for the fresh deployment, this is going to be the Anypoint CLI command. It is a deploy command where we would be specifying the runtime, the workers involved, the worker size, the properties. So in my case, it is going to be mule.env as the property, and another property where I'm specifying the deployment target and another user property. Finally, the application name and the jar file path. So I'm verifying here if the above command is successful, which means the deployment is succeeded. I'm giving it a rest before I go about describing the API, the application name. So if this command is a failure, it means the fresh deployment has failed. So we are running the CLI command using modify, which would trigger the redeployment. For the redeployment, we'll have to specify the environment. In our case, it is going to be dev. And again, we'll go about specifying the runtime, workers, worker size, the respective properties involved, and the application name and the jar file path. So once again, we would be checking for the success scenario here. It is mentioned redeployment has succeeded. And we'll go about describing the artifact. So I'll quickly copy this. Paste it here. Since we have a lot of variables, we will have to create them. The runtime is going to be 4.3.0. Workers, let's say 1. Worker size, let's make it 0.1. Environment we are interested in, dev. User property, size. Application name. Dev proc DFS API. And finally, the application jar file path. Saving it here. So going back to the release. So we do not have a release yet. Let's quickly verify if we have everything correct. So we have triggered the continuous deployment trigger. And if you need to set any approvers, here is the place where you would set the approver. So after the release is created, you can mention pre-deployment approvals. You can simply enable it and mention the user or the email ID rather of the user. He needs to belong to Azure DevOps first, and you can specify the timeout, like how many days it can, hold valid. So let's disable these for now. Likewise, you can specify the post-deployment conditions here as well. So under post-deployment, you can go about specifying auto redeployment trigger, where you can say deployment to the stage fails. You can say redeploy the last successful deployment. So this is a good rollover strategy. So I'm disabling it again. Okay, I think we are all good. Yeah, no runs yet. So let's trigger it by making a change and committing it. I'm not gonna make a huge change. I'm just gonna delete this line to trigger the build. I'm gonna say updated pom.xml check-in. Going back to the pipeline. So you can see here that the CA part is being triggered. And this is where you will look at the logs. Let's give it some time for it to complete. So as you can see, the CA part is complete and it says one artifact is produced. So this would show us the jar file path where the artifact is being placed. And this is the path which I specified there in the variables. Going to release. So you can see that the release has been triggered and it is performing the step for the deployment. Let's wait for a while for it to complete. So you can see here that the bash has executed, the fresh deployment has started. So going to endpoint platform. So it is trying to deploy it to CloudHub. It's gonna take some time. So looking at the log. So we can see now that the API is successfully started. So this concludes our CloudHub deployment. Let's proceed to on-premise deployment. My project uses domain projects to share the HTTP port for all the APIs deployed to a particular on-premise server. So this makes it a prerequisite to have a CI pipeline created for the domain project to publish it first to the Azure Artifactory. So this is a simple API which is supposed to be deployed to on-premise, and you can see that it is tied to a domain project. If we take a look at the pom.xml file for the domain project, in addition to the repositories which we added for the CloudHub, we would be required to add this segment of distribution management where it would publish it to the Azure DevOps Artifactory. The credentials for this URL would find its place in the settings.xml file. So this is like a prerequisite even before we proceed with the creation of pipelines for our on-prem API. So in TFS, this is where it resides, our API. And this is what I meant by Artifactory. So all our APIs would find its place here. So you can go about by creating a feed. I have already created one for our current demo called CICD. So simply if you go create it, you can give it a name, you can specify who has access to it and all. So it's pretty straightforward. So going to the pipelines, I'll also quickly show you the CI for the domain project. It isn't any different from the pipeline which we created for CloudHub. So it just has this additional task here which specifies the Artifactory, and we would be requiring this for our on-prem CI part as well. So going back, creating a new pipeline. Again, our source is TFS. Let's map our project. Done. We will start with an empty job again. Let's specify the agent specification. Give it a name. Let's quickly set the CI trigger. So we are interested only in this API here for it to trigger. Done. Going back to tasks. So our first step would be to provide the Maven authentication for the Artifactory. So our field would be CICD. And this is our collection. So once you create one on Artifactory, you will also be able to find it here. So the next task would be similar to what we did before, downloading the secure file. Settings.xml. Let's use the same name for the reference name. Third step would be bash. So there isn't any major difference between the CloudHub and on-premise for the CI part. So let's specify it inline. The same command, the Maven clean package command. And as the last step, we would be publishing it. Let's give it a name. Let's call it on-prem demo. Let's quickly save it. Yeah. So this concludes our CI part. Let's go create a CD release. So you can see the CloudHub pipeline is successfully deployed to dev. Okay, let's create one new for on-prem. We will start with the empty job. Give it the same name as the CI. Select the artifact we would be interested in. On-prem demo. We are interested in the latest one always. Before we forget, let's enable continuous deployment trigger. So our stage would be dev. And this is all similar, setting the pre-deployment and the post-deployment. I'm quickly jumping in. Ubuntu, setting the specification. First step would be to include the credentials file. Done. And the next step would be to configure the bash for the deployment. Before we paste it here, let me quickly explain you what I have done on the script. Okay, so this is for readability. So as a first step, we are making use of the OAuth URI. So this is an ARM REST API, Runtime Manager's REST API, to fetch the token, the authentication token, based on our client ID and secret. So once we get the token, we'll have to initiate the deployment, a fresh deployment, we can call it. So here we are again making use of the Anypoint Runtime Manager's REST API to trigger the Scratch deployment. The reason we are doing it this way and not making use of the Anypoint CLI is, as part of our deployment, we may have a few user properties which we need to provide. At the moment, Anypoint CLI's standalone command does not satisfy that purpose. So we are making use of the ARM REST API. So as you can see, we'll be making use of the token which we got from the previous step. We'll be specifying the environment ID, the organization ID, the file's path, the file's name, the application name. The file name would be the jar file name. The target ID would be the on-prem server's target ID, the Mule version. And here for the application name, these are the properties, the user properties, which we are supposed to provide. So the deployment target is on-prem, and size, this is a user property, which I would be filling it from the variables. So once this is done, we are checking if the deployment is successful, and if it is mentioning something like this in the error window, this target as an application with the same name. So this is to facilitate the redeployment process. So for redeployment, we will have to again use and install npm anypoint CLI. So we are installing all those, like in the CloudHub bash script, we are importing the credentials, creating the appropriate home directories, and exporting the profile. For redeployment, it is safe to use the CLI command because we are only modifying the jar file path here. One more thing to notice is we will have to specify the already deployed API's target ID as well. So these two are the important parameters by which a redeployment can happen. So once the redeployment is successful, we are letting it sleep for a particular time, and finally we are trying to describe the API. Else we are throwing the appropriate errors. So going back, I'd be quickly pasting it. Yeah, just some last minute changes here. Yeah, done. So the next step would be to create the appropriate variables. Let's start with the user property. Let's give it 1000. Application name, let's call it devproc tfs API. Application jar file path. So this is the path of the jar file once the CA part is complete. Just giving it beforehand. So this is how the jar file is going to be named. Target ID. So this is the target ID of the runtime server. I'll finally show you how I'm coming up with all these values. The Mule version 4.3.0, the dev app target ID. So I leave it blank since it is going to be a scratch deployment. We'll have to just make sure that once the scratch deployment is complete, you go back to the platform and update it with the respective ID here. Save it. Pipeline. Let's verify everything is correct. What we will do, save it. Let's go back to the pipeline for the CA part. On-prem, no runs yet. Okay. Triggers, done. Yeah. So let's make a similar change in the pom.xml for it to trigger. Edit. Save it. So you can see that the CA part is being triggered. Let's wait for it to complete. Okay, the job is complete. You can see that the artifact is produced as before. So going to release. So you can see a release is created and it is in progress. Going to the logs. It's ready. Let's wait for it to complete. Okay, so you can see that the bash script has completed successfully. So this is the description of it. You can see here that it is started successfully. So go to manage properties. So you can see the properties which we have provided there. Like this for the CloudHub as well. And the runtime properties as well. So this concludes the demo. We have successfully seen how to deploy an API to both CloudHub and an on-prem server. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Surinder. It was a very insightful session. And just as a token of an appreciation for our audience, we have an exclusive webinar offer. We're going to give a jumpstart package, and that includes for our audience, if they're using Mule or they're facing challenges, we can have a 3 hours of a session where we can understand and assess the Mule upgrade assessment, any gap analysis that is there for the newer or the existing functionality that they have. On top of that, if they are willing or if they are planning to create a CI/CD pipeline, we can also have 3 hours of a session, and we can discuss all of these things. So as a next step, we can we can sort of engage with you guys and understand the challenges. So based on that, we can we can start this engagement with you guys. So now moving forward to the question and answer session, I think I'll have to see what questions are there in the list. So okay, so the first question that I have is related to okay. So the first question from the audience is, so the settings of .xml is in the private agent. How have we solved the need for RTF?
Okay. For the first question, right? The settings.xml. As part of this demo, we are using Azure's in-house agent. We can also go about creating private agents on our local system as well. To answer the question in precise, the settings.xml and the credentials file, they both would be uploaded to the Azure DevOps under library secure files. It is secure in a way that no one will be able to view the file once uploaded. So when you are making some changes, you'll have to go and upload a new file to overwrite it. That is how it is.
Okay, great.
What was the second question?
So the second question was more related to, have you solved for such special needs of RTF?
For that, RTF is not in scope for this demo. We only focused on the deployment to CloudHub and our on-premise servers. But to answer it briefly, yes, it can be done. The only place where it is going to change is the deployment would have to follow the same standards as we did for CloudHub. But there would be an additional step where we would be uploading the artifact to the exchange, the Anypoint exchange. We can do it via Maven as well as using the Anypoint CLI exchange upload, access upload commands. Yeah, that should be done. Yeah, maybe we can take it up as part of a different webinar altogether.
Great. I think I will take this question also as part of our future roadmap also, because as part of this demo, we're also going to request our audience to fill a survey form, and in that we will basically ask what topic that we would need to cover. So we will keep that in mind for our next webinar. Okay. Another question from the audience. So the question is, let me read that out. Surinder, they're asking, can we choose which artifact version to deploy, as it seems we cannot choose that?
To answer this, yes, we can obviously choose which version to deploy. It is within our needs to choose which version to deploy. So under the release pipeline, at the source where we are seeing that artifact version, where we are linking the CI pipeline with the CD pipeline, there if you click on the artifact, by default it would choose the latest version. You can also specify that the version at the time of deployment, so it can be made manual to an extent, or you can specify a specific version. Since ours was a new pipeline, we would be seeing only one version there. But let's say we have gone about doing multiple releases, right? So we would have 2-3 builds now. So we can simply choose which version we want from the dropdown. It is as simple as that.
Great. And just on the same lines, there is another question from the audience that can we schedule the deployment?
Yes, Azure DevOps does provide an option to configure the schedule using a cron expression. So this helps us to initiate the deployment at a particular time window. We can also customize the schedule to pick only when a build version has changed. So these are all the options provided out of the box.
Great. Let me look at the other question. Okay, so one question from our audience is, what is the advantage of Anypoint CLI deployment over Maven deployment?
The biggest advantage for me, of course, of the Anypoint CLI or the ARM REST services deployment over Maven would be that there is almost no specific API related configurational changes required within the pom.xml file. And like I already reiterated, this would help us in the ongoing projects where minimal rework or almost negligible rework is required for the already developed services.
Okay, great. There is another question. Have you been able to use Python scripts instead of using batch scripts?
Python is an option. Azure DevOps does allow that, but I was comfortable with Bash script, and that's the reason I chose that for this demo.
Okay. And just along with the same lines, there is another question. So these questions are related to, and these are kind of two questions that they have asked. So why use Bash instead of just Maven? How do you deal with RTF being unable to redeploy the same version?
The reason I chose to not use Maven for the deployment is it would involve a lot of pom.xml changes to provide the configuration, because Maven basically does everything from the pom.xml. And by the use of ARM REST services or Anypoint CLI commands for that matter, I was able to configure everything outside the service and via the pipeline, so that it can be made reused across the pipelines as well. And regarding RTF, like I mentioned, it is not as part of this demo. Maybe we can take it up as part of a different session altogether.
Right. Thank you very much, guys. We've already taken the RTF webinar into consideration. We will come back with our next webinar options for RTF for sure. Okay. There's another question, Surinder, for you. What is in the credential files again?
Okay. Credential file is simply a JSON file, and the reason I'm using credentials file is to make sure I provide the authorization credentials for Azure DevOps to connect to the Anypoint platform. So like I said, I have been using connected apps here to establish that connection. So I would be providing the client ID and secret of the connected app inside the credentials file.
Okay, great. And the next question is, Anypoint Exchange is immutable once deployed.
I think this is also related to RTF.
Okay, this is also related to RTF. That's fine. Guys, for RTF related questions, we will park it, and hopefully in the next webinar, we will try and see if we can do the RTF webinar, and we will cover these questions over there. Okay, let's go to another question. Let me see. Yes. So we have one more question. Where can a security layer be introduced in the pipeline?
Security layer in the sense like Azure DevOps in itself can be accessed on, I mean, the pipelines can only be accessed to the people who belong to a particular ADO group. So security is available at that level. And as you can see, the sensitive information with respect to the client ID, secrets, everything have been externalized to the settings.xml file and the credentials file, which I said will be uh, what to say, it is also immutable in the sense that we will not be able to go about changing it, or we will not be able to view those files. So security is enforced there. And Azure Artifactory stores those in a secure location as well. So we will no layman can just log in and view those artifacts for themselves.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So there's a very interesting question here. And they're asking, can you please share the bash files?
Yes, as part of this webinar, we are also extending it to create an implementation guide. So a detailed implementation guide covering those bash files, a sample settings file, a credentials file, all those would be uploaded in the Royal Cyber website shortly.
Great. Another question pertaining to the same lines. For audit purposes, any way to have developers' credentials or ID for deployment?
I don't understand the question properly. It
Okay, I
means
think
that to track who's deploying what?
that no. So basically, yeah, I think this is more related to any ways how is there a way for us to kind of track or audit developers' credentials, IDs for the deployment, like who has deployed it, something like that. This is, I believe, the question.
Okay.
Like, you know, audit perspective, they wanted to understand.
Okay. I mean, the way I understood this question is uh, right from the start, right? Like, let's say a particular user has access to ADO or to TFS for that matter. He or she is going to commit a particular change, and that is what is going to trigger the CI pipeline. So we would know from the user that from the CI pipeline that who has triggered a particular build. So that tracking is available or that auditing is available, and we can also have or choose who approves a particular deployment. So uh, so it is like, let's say a project manager for that matter, or a project or an API owner can go about having an approver setup, so that we can basically track who builds the project, who approves the deployment and everything. So this would solve that question, I think.
Yeah, I think so, because you know, from an auditing perspective, the system itself is completely auditable. So there has to be a 4i kind of principle available. Okay, I hope it answers the audience question. There is another question. The question is there a way to add CI/CD XML to the POM so that when new projects are created, you don't have to paste it in every time?
Okay. Out of our project's experience, what we did was we had a template project created, and we introduced whichever is required for the CI/CD as part of the POM file there, so that any new developer who starts on a particular API will already have it in the POM.xml. Maybe that would help you in your project as well.
Okay, great. One other question from the audience. Many a times there are user properties like passwords which are to be extracted from external vault. For example, you know, HashiCorp during the application deployment. I mean, you know, the HashiCorp during the application deployment. Can Azure Ops integrate with such external tools using CI/CD?
Azure DevOps does provide a handshake with multiple such vaults, but I have not exactly tried that to answer this question.
Okay. But what you're saying is that yes, definitely it is possible to you know, connect with external vault and
Yes,
extract
Azure
the.
DevOps does provide a lot of such connectors where we can establish connections to fetch these sensitive informations.
Okay, great. There is another question from the audience. Can we control a particular task in either CI or CD pipeline using a condition?
Yes, we can specify control statements mentioning to execute the current task only when a previous step is successful or partially successful, and we can also go about establishing a custom condition. So this way we can specify control statements in ADO.
Okay. And what is the benefit of splitting CI and CD pipeline? Maven can achieve both in a single step.
For me, the biggest benefit would be of splitting the CA and CD is to establish a single build and a multiple deploy to various environmental targets. The biggest downside for me for Maven would be that it would require the POM to be packaged again, resulting in an overhead of a wait time.
Great. And what all access rights are required in connected apps with respect to CI/CD?
It is completely customizable based on what the API deals with. The mandatory rights for me would be the design center developer access, the CloudHub administrator to create and read applications. If your project has a dependency where you have some artifacts like a raml or something residing on exchange, right, then you would require exchange administrator access as well.
Awesome. There is another interesting question, and that is how easy it is to do all this CI/CD work in YAML file rather than how you did it.
Okay. The reason I did it in a manual way was because TFS, when TFS is the source control, we do not have that the facility to use YAMLs. But if it is, let's say Git or Subversion for that matter, yes, Azure DevOps does support YAML. It should be, I mean, it should be as easy as configuring a particular YAML, and we can also introduce more validations since it is being an YAML. So I don't think it is much of a difference. Like people who find it easier, it is completely up to them to choose which approach to take. And even if it is going to be manual, like I showed you, you can simply export a pipeline or like to clone it or to create a template out of it. So whichever is common across all the pipelines can be made as a template. So there isn't much to choose as a difference between both approaches.
Great. I think this is the last question, which I'm going to ask now probably. What other source control systems does Azure DevOps support?
Okay, Azure DevOps does support all the leading version control systems like the Azure Git, GitHub, Subversion, etc. So like I said, for Git and Subversion, we can go about using the YAML configurations to create the pipelines, or you can choose to use the manual method, which I showcased in the demo.
Okay, I think we've got one last question again from the audience. So the question is, so can you do both CI and CD in a single YAML file? Should we split that?
Yeah, yes, it is up to you. You can choose to have both in the same YAML file, or you can split it based on the environment. Like I said, the reason I did it this way was I found this to be of a greater, I mean, providing greater benefits, like I mentioned. So let's say you have an artifact which is built once and you want it to be deployed to several environments. So in my case, dev, QA, and UAT, right? So I need not have to build it over and over again. So I can choose to reuse the artifact. So that's the reason I split the CI from the CD.
Okay, great. I think this is awesome. Thank you so much, Surinder, for taking this time out and discussing the entire CI/CD pipeline on Azure DevOps. We've really got to know a lot out of this. So I'd like to personally thank our audience and thank you for taking that time out. Just one last thing, guys. So at the end of this webinar, there is a survey. Please do fill that out, and based upon your survey, since we've got questions on RTF, we would definitely take this into consideration and try to bring a webinar on RTF if available next time. Thank you so much and have an awesome day. Thank you. Bye bye.